give myself a look, I'm at the corner just in time to see the bus fly by. It's alright, cause I'm safe at the bell. If the teacher pops a test, I know I'm in a mess, and my dog ate all my homework last night. Riding low in my chair, she won't know that I'm there. If I can hand it in tomorrow, it'll be alright. It's alright, cause I'm safe by the bell. It's alright, cause I'm safe by the bell. It's alright, cause I'm safe by the bell. It's alright, cause I'm safe by the bell.
Today is the last day of our series, Throwback. And in this series, we've been looking at these ancient stories in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. And there are these generations of one family, Abraham and his wife Sarah, and then you have Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Rachel, and then they have Joseph, and we're talking about Joseph today. And here at One Church, our slogan is questions and doubts welcome. Our first value is One Church is a safe place to express your questions and doubts. And so as we look at these ancient stories in the Bible, we realize thinking people have a lot of questions about how the Bible is interpreted. Are you with me? And so there are a lot of things in our society, polarizing issues, controversies, people who are claiming that, the Bible says this, and so we have to vote this way, and Jesus wants us to do this, and there are all kinds of claims in our society. But what we want to do here at One Church is we want to realize that the Bible, first of all, is complicated. The Bible is not one book, it's a collection of books written over centuries, and there are all kinds of ways of interpreting those different things. And so we're looking at these ancient stories, and a lot of people think, well, what in the world would that have to do with my life? If these are historical figures, they lived 3,000 years ago. And a lot of things we read in these passages are kind of troubling and weird. What does that have to do with my life? At the same time, we found every week, I hope you agree with me, when we read these stories, we somehow mysteriously find ourselves in these stories. They're still powerful stories. And although culture has changed, it seems that human nature has not changed. And that we can identify with these people in ways that are really moving to us. And today we're talking about Joseph, who experienced this emotional roller coaster in life. Events were up and down, and good times and bad, and betrayal, and struggling to forgive. And a lot of us are going to be able to find ourselves in his story. And so we're talking about the past, looking at our own pasts, so that we can create a better future together. And a lot of times when we talk about the future, especially if you're a parent, you think, what kind of a world are we going to create for our kids? You know what I mean? And we think about, what kind of a world are we going to leave them? Well, there's a throwback, meme on Facebook. Keith Richards is the guitarist of the Rolling Stones. He self-admittedly has ingested a lot of substances that may not have been legal throughout his life, but he just seems to hang around. He's never going to die, so I love this meme. You probably can't read it because the font's too small, but it says, we need to start thinking about the kind of world we're going to leave for Keith Richards. I laughed out loud by myself when I read that, you guys. Come on. All right, he could outlive us all. So we're thinking about the past in order to create a better future. Some of the most difficult questions we have to deal with are, how do we respond when emotionally painful things happen to us? What do we do? What do we do when we have plans for life and things don't go that way? What do we do when people we love and trust hurt us and maybe even betray us, let us down? Well, the story of Joseph provides some of those answers. Maybe a couple of weeks ago, Jimmy Fallon spent 10 days in the ICU. Have you heard this story? Because he fell, and I guess he caught his ring finger on his kitchen counter, and he ended up spending 10 days in the ICU over this. They had to take a vein from his foot, and it ended up being this, almost life-threatening injury. It sounds so simple, but they're microsurgery to go back and save his finger. And so his first night back on the show, he told the story of his hospital stay and what he was thinking during his hospital stay. So let's watch this about 2-minute clip. Isn't that great? You can tell he's a little deeper than what meets the eye. He's had Joel Osteen on his show before. Like he has some kind of spiritual spiritual interest. It's okay, you can go to that one. And he mentions reading this work by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and then he says, my meaning is to entertain you guys. So he was thinking about this stuff, for real, while he was in the hospital. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust concentration camp survivor who wrote this book based on his experience during the Holocaust. And you see kind of the essence of the book, Man's Search for Meaning, there in this quote. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we can go back to that slide there, the picture of Viktor Frankl there. There you go. When we're no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That's the essence of his book. Psychology Today ran an article entitled Man's Search for Meaning, Meaning is a Cure for Depression and Other Ills. And the author quotes Frankl, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread." Imagine that. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man or woman, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Isn't that beautiful, powerful? And so Frankl's message is ultimately one of hope, they write. Even in the most absurd, painful, and dehumanizing situation, life can be given a meaning, and so too can suffering. So Frankl went on to found a counseling practice, and he taught that we can find meaning in life in three main ways. Creativity, giving of ourselves, expressing ourselves in one way. The second way was by experiencing the world authentically, not in a fantasy world, not as we wish it were, but actually living life as it comes. And then the third way was similar to what we read on the screen, changing our attitude when we are faced with a situation or circumstance that we cannot change. When we can't control the circumstance, we can control our response to it. And the story of Joseph is a beautiful, moving story of that being lived out. So Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, and their two handmaids. So Jacob with four women, right? There's polygamy going on in these stories. That's why we don't read the Bible and just do whatever it says, right? We interpret the Bible. Some people are like, I just believe the Bible, man. Like, all right, man, well, you can go to jail for that now, but that's your choice. So they have lots and lots of children together, including 12 sons. The next to last son is Joseph. And then his little brother is Benjamin, and Rachel actually dies in childbirth, giving birth to Benjamin. So Joseph lost his mother at an early age, and he became his father's favorite. When Joseph was 17, he helped his dad by tending sheep. These are Bedouin sheiks in the ancient Middle East. They're nomadic sheep herders. And so he's helping his dad by tending the sheep, and Jacob made an ornate robe for Jacob. So Joseph in the amazing Technicolor dream coat, right? So he makes this ornate robe for Joseph, and his brothers were jealous of him because of this. They hated Joseph because they knew his father favored him. To make matters worse, Joseph had a couple of dreams, and he told his brothers about these kind of strange dreams he had. In the first dream, he and his brothers were binding grain in sheaves. So again, they're harvesting grain, and they're binding all these sheaves of grain together. And the brothers' sheaves of grain bow down to his. You imagine a brother telling that to his, and they're not thrilled about that dream. They're thinking he's arrogant, he's a dreamer. He has a second dream in which the sun, moon, and 11 stars bow down to him, and he tells his brothers this dream. So they hated him all the more. By the way, it was thought until about 500 BC that there were only 11 constellations. That's probably what this is referring to. The sun, moon, and 11 constellations. Now, I think they track like 88 now. So he tells his brothers these dreams. They hate him even worse. And so one day Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers out in the fields because they didn't know that they were plotting to kill their brother Joseph. So they see him coming, and they say, "Here comes the dreamer." And they have this elaborate plan to kill him, let lions eat his body, and take this tattered coat back to their dad and say, "Oh, we couldn't save him." And to off their brother, Godfather 2 style, in secrecy. So Reuben, the oldest brother, talks them out of it. He's like, you know what? Let's just throw him in a cistern, which is a deep hole meant to catch water in the desert. Let's just throw him there, and then, whatever happens to him happens. And Reuben planned to actually come back and rescue him. So his older brother wanted to save him. But he left, and so when he reached his brothers, they tore off his robe, and they threw him into the cistern. And then they saw a caravan of merchants traveling through the desert. And so Judah, another older brother, says, you know what, instead of just leaving him in the cistern to die, why don't we sell him? We can at least make money off this deal. And so they sell him, and we're talking about human smuggling, to this caravan of merchants traveling through, and they're headed towards Egypt, which is the most powerful empire in the Middle East in this time. And so they slaughtered a goat, they wiped its blood all over this ornate coat, they sold him to the merchants, and they took the coat back to his father Jacob. And they said, sorry, Dad, your son has been killed by a wild animal. And so, of course, he grieves and he's beside himself. And the merchants travel to Egypt, and they sell Joseph to an Egyptian official named Potiphar. And Potiphar is the captain of Pharaoh's guard. And so Joseph has these strange dreams about people bowing to him, and now he goes through this awful experience of betrayal. And then he's sold into human slavery. But he finds himself, see, the ups and downs, you're already getting a sense of that. He finds himself in the home of this high-ranking official. So, in difficult circumstances, in the ups and downs of life, perhaps we could start here and just observe in difficulty. We're invited to trust that God might be working behind the scenes in ways we don't fully realize. And I don't know what that looks like for you. Hopefully your brothers aren't trying to kill you, but whatever your pain looks like, whatever the difficulty looks like, and we're all experiencing it in some way, maybe we can trust that God is working behind the scenes, and we'll see how this plays out. So Joseph now lives in the home of this high-ranking official, Potiphar. And Genesis says that God was with Joseph. God blessed him and gave him favor. He prospered in this situation of servitude. And Potiphar grew to trust Joseph. So much so that Potiphar put Joseph in charge of all of his household affairs. And Joseph has this natural ability to lead, I guess. And he just kind of rises to the top, and Potiphar puts him in charge. His attitude and his integrity, like Viktor Frankl was talking about, gets him promoted. And so now, the roller coaster ride continues, but then again, things take a dive. So let's read on the screens, Genesis chapter 39, 6 through 12. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. Verse 8, but he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you were his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me, but he left the cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. He could have been executed, for this behavior. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. Look, she said to them, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. It's a euphemism for, forcing her. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. So he's ups and downs. So he finds himself in this high-ranking official's house, but now he's been accused of this terrible act. Potiphar has no choice but to throw Joseph into prison. He actually has mercy on him, and he's not dead. I guess he put him in prison because he liked him. And so now Joseph finds himself sitting in this Egyptian prison. It was the prison where Pharaoh put his prisoners. So perhaps if we're kind of looking for points of identification in this story, we can trust that God is working behind the scenes, and this trust will protect you from the anxiety that triggers temptation. This trust in God, the trust that God is working behind the scenes in ways we don't fully understand. Perhaps that trust can actually protect us from the anxiety that triggers temptation. Here's what I mean by that. A good friend of mine has been clean and sober for about 10 years, which completely saved his life. And I've been blessed to know quite a few people who've come through AA or NA, and their lives are completely different than what they were before. And this friend has helped me understand AA and the 12-step process. I've read the big book and I've heard, heard the history. I went to a meeting with them, and AA was created in Akron, Ohio, by a recovering alcoholic named Bill Wilson, Bill W., and Dr. Bob Smith. And 12-step programs are essentially based on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, if you don't know that. The principles are taken right out of the New Testament. Bill W. was listed by Time as one of the 100 most important people of the 20th century. Imagine all the people, hundreds of thousands of people that have found healing through AA. And along with my friend telling me about AA, my master's degree is actually in pastoral counseling. So for 2 years, I went through a cohort with students who ended up being clinical counselors. So I'm not a clinical counselor. I'm not really qualified for that, but I sat in with that same cohort for a couple of years, and we learned that self-destructive behavior follows a pattern no matter what the drug of choice or behavior of choice is. It's all the same. It's just the only difference is pick your poison. But how it actually works out, this addictive, compulsive behavior, is actually the same. So drug use, excessive drinking, sexual addiction, whatever it may be, are all attempts at masking or escaping a sense of anxiety. Do you know what I'm talking about? They're ways of trying to relieve or run away from the anxiety that we feel in our lives, and the pattern is the same. It doesn't matter if it's heroin or excessive alcohol or sexual addiction. The pattern is always the same. Instead of experiencing life, remember Viktor Frankl and the meaning. Instead of experiencing life authentically as it is, we try to somehow run from that and alter our moods and have different experiences. And that attempt to escape is what leads us into all kinds of destructive patterns in our lives. And I know a lot of times, this passage in sexuality in general has been dealt with by pastors in a way that has been extremely guilt-producing. Can I get an amen, brothers and sisters? And it seems like for a lot of people, their Christianity is basically all about sex. It's about having a sexually prudish view of the world. You know what I'm talking about? Religious fundamentalists are obsessed with sex. If you haven't learned that yet, and that goes across religious differences. And so I kind of shy away from that because I don't want to keep reinforcing that topic. But what we understand now is that a lot of self-destructive behavior that people feel guilty about is really an attempt to run away from their anxiety. You follow me? And so AA has learned these lessons over time, and they have ways of teaching us to deal with these anxious, stressful feelings that can tempt us to kind of derail our lives and make things worse. And there's an acronym, HALT, or you can add an S and make it HALTs. And these are triggers that produce anxiety in our lives. And when people in AA feel any of these triggers, they know it's time to run, like Joseph. And then the running it's time to run to get out of these states. And they're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and stressed, if you add the S. So a person with an addiction understands, if I'm feeling any one of these things, I am now much more prone to falling prey to my addiction. Do you see what I'm saying? And so the key is not to try to defeat your anxiety or addictive behavior just by willpower alone. Like, I will not drink, I will not drink, I won't think of the pink elephant, I won't think of the pink elephant, right? Because that's what happens. The key is to get out of these states. So if I'm hungry, I eat. So the point is don't drink, or don't engage in the addictive behavior, but eat. Get out of that state. If I'm angry, it's not just willpower, it's saying, okay, what am I angry about? And self-monitoring and knowing, oh, this is why I'm angry. This is why I feel this way. Knowing why you feel the way you feel. And then you can deal with that anger, lonely. To know, I'm lonely. And how many of us understand that you can be lonely in a crowd? You can be lonely with family. Some people, if they were honest, would say they're lonely in their marriage. Well, where does that lead? Or this isn't rocket science. So the key is to deal with the loneliness, the underlying state that tempts us to engage in these behaviors. Are you tired? I had a Bible professor, brilliant man, Just a holy man, good man. And he said, you know what? Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is just go to sleep. Just get some rest. And Americans are bad at that. We don't get enough sleep. So we're all run down, don't take enough vacations, don't take enough downtime. We're all work. That's just an American trait. And we can find ourselves just not just tired as in we've missed a night's sleep, but tired as like, I haven't rested in 15 years. Right? There are people that would say that, right? And so the trick is to get out of the state of tiredness and find a balanced life of rhythm stressed. What is it that's causing the stress? And to deal with that. And that cuts off that temptation at the root before it leads to this self-destructive, addictive behavior. Is that helpful at all? I remember when he shared this stuff with me, I thought, oh man, it's not a matter of, well, you're just bad because you do these things. Because what solution is there then? Okay, well, I guess I pretend I'm not bad anymore. And that leads to fundamentalism. Or I can deal with the states that tempt me in the first place. So perhaps trusting that God is working behind the scenes helps relieve some of the stress. You know, I don't have to work myself to the bone all the time because I can trust that God will provide and it's going to be okay and I can live a healthy life and I don't have to be lonely because God has created a community of people for me called the church who can be my family if I don't have a family. And trust in God can short-circuit this. Are you angry? Well, God's big enough to take it. God's a big boy. And I'm angry at this. Why is it this way, God? And maybe it's counseling or maybe it's talking to a trusted friend, but that trust in God, or if, there are people here who would not really call themselves that religious of people. Trust in life. Trust in the universe, however you want to put it. I'm not trying to be exclusive in these terms, but that's what it means. Trust that things are going to be okay. And that can save so much pain in lives. All right, so point made. So life is not fair. And Joseph, as a man of integrity, does the right thing, and he finds himself in prison. He's at a new low now. He's sitting in this Egyptian prison, but this is the prison where Pharaoh sends his prisoners. So you see, even how Joseph gets lower, there's actually, if you look for it, there's this like glimpse of light in his situation where he's getting closer and closer to the fulfillment of these dreams, that things would bow to him somehow. And he's getting closer and closer to Pharaoh. So what happens? God is working behind the scenes. The prison warden puts Joseph in charge of the other prisoners. You see a pattern here. He just rises to the top. And sometime later, Pharaoh imprisoned 2 people. Apparently there was a plot to poison Pharaoh. And so he sends his cupbearer, the person who holds his cup that he drinks out of, and he sends the chief baker to prison. So the baker bakes the food and the cupbearer has the beverages. And so he's like, one of you guys just tried to off me. I don't know who it is yet, but I'm going to send you both to prison until I find out. So the cupbearer and the chief baker land in this prison with Joseph, and the 2 men have a dream on the same night. Remember what happened to Joseph earlier in life when he was 17. He had dreams. And somehow, he's this person who was intuitive and he can somehow interpret these things. So the cupbearer and the chief baker have dreams, but they can't find anybody to interpret for them. And so they tell Joseph their dreams. And he says to the cupbearer, he says, man, good news. Your dream means you're going to be freed from prison in 3 days. You're going to be acquitted. And you're going to go back to serve Pharaoh again. Chief baker, not so much. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, chief baker. So his dream is that he's going to be executed by Pharaoh. Both dream interpretations happen as he says. And as the cupbearer is being released from prison, Joseph says, please remember me. Sometimes life doesn't go the way you hope. What happens? The cupbearer forgets about Joseph. So he's in prison, just languishing in this Egyptian prison for a couple of more years until Pharaoh has a dream. And in his dream, he sees, he's standing beside the Nile River, and he sees 7 cows, healthy cows, walk out of the Nile River. But then he sees 7 starving cows walk out of the Nile. And the starving cows eat the healthy cows. You ever have dreams like this? Like, what in the world's going on? And so Pharaoh has these weird dreams, and he's looking for somebody to interpret his dreams. He sends for his magicians and his interpreters, but none of them can interpret his dreams. And then the cupbearer overhears this. And he says, oh, there's this guy in prison who interpreted my dream. And Pharaoh, he could interpret yours. And so Pharaoh calls for Joseph. and he tells him his dream. And Joseph interprets his dream. Not only that, but he suggests a strategy, a leadership strategy to Pharaoh. He casts vision to Pharaoh about what this dream means and what to do. Joseph says what this means is, Pharaoh, is that there are going to be 7 great abundant years of harvest. You're going to have an abundance of crops, and it's going to be excellent. But then that's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. So what we need to do is store up the excess from the healthy crop so we can have enough food to make it through the 7 years of famine. What does Pharaoh do? He puts him in charge of all of his affairs. He's second in command of Egypt at 30 years old, and he's a leader in Egypt because he's helped them to prepare for the future. So we're trusting that God is working behind the scenes, and that can protect us from short-circuiting our lives and self-destructive behavior. Perhaps we can gain this as well, that we can partner with God by planning for the future. Somehow in the story, God communicates what's going to happen in the future. And Joseph and Pharaoh, they partner with God to prepare for the future. So let me ask you, do you have a plan for your future? And I know this starts to sound like a Tony Robbins power talk or something, when you talk about things like this. A lot of people just roll their eyes. Some people, they don't really think about planning for the future. It seems too intentional. I suppose most people probably. And they just kind of go with the flow kind of people. But I want to ask you, do you have a plan for your future? Do you have a plan for your family's future? Obviously, I think it's important, or I wouldn't be asking. Is there a plan somehow? Now, you don't want to be if you're a parent, you don't want to be the overbearing parent who tries to live vicariously through your kids. You don't want to do that. You don't want to force them. But you also want to, I talked with a dad a couple of weeks ago who told me this. He's like, I want to observe what my kids are good at and then resource them. And kind of have that plan, help resource them, maybe help them get scholarships and think about what careers they might be good at. And I can introduce them to people in those careers, and I can kind of help my kids. I can push them in the direction they're already going. And that could be that's his plan for his kids' future. So do you have a plan? I saw a Facebook meme again that looked like this. As a mother, my job is to take care of the possible and trust God with the impossible. Isn't that great? So I can take care of the possible. I can plan for my family's future. I can plan for my own future. It's a little different when you're leading an organization. Organizations don't have hopes and dreams. They go in the direction that they're steered. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And I'm talking to leaders here. I believe that everybody can be a leader, by the way. I think leadership can be learned. Some of the people here are already more naturally gifted as leaders in those positions. When it comes to leadership, how many of you realize that leaders are lightning rods? Because leaders have to lead people where they may not want to go. That's the key. Anybody can lead people where they want to go, but leaders are charged with the task of leading people where they don't want to go necessarily, but where they need to go. And so as a leader, man, it's tough. It can be emotionally tough. It can be a roller coaster. But what you have to do as a leader is look into the future. And with the best intuition you have, and the best information you have, anticipate where the organization, the business, the school, the family is going to be in the future, and anticipate that and plan ahead of time. If you wait until that happens, it's too late. So you anticipate ahead of time where things need to go, and then you start moving in that direction. I'm on a late night TV theme here for some reason, but Letterman interviewed Bill Gates in 1995. And he asks Bill Gates this question about this newfangled thing called the internet. And Letterman, I hope, is joking or half joking, but I want you to listen to this conversation for a couple of minutes as Letterman talks with Bill Gates 20 years ago about this new thing called the internet, and listen to who was right about anticipating the future. This is from an old VHS tape. The tracking's bad. Remember tracking? Talk about Throwback. All right, so let's check it out. Letterman and Bill Gates. Nice. So Letterman compares the internet with a couple of British magazines he gets, radio, tape recorders. Now he's joking, I assume, there. But if he were serious, think about the internet. It has changed the geopolitical situation of the world. Those comments would be asinine if he were serious about those things, because Bill Gates was able to see into the future and project what the internet would do. So here are some questions about planning in the future. You know, you have your typical ones. Where do you want to be in 10 years? And what opportunities do you want your children to have? But here's some questions for those of us who want to be intentional about partnering with God to plan for the future. Who do you need to meet? Who are people that you could meet who could help you get where you need to go? What do you need to read? You know, books, resources, or internet articles. What do you need to read that would equip you to get where you need to go? Where do you need to go physically? Do you need to travel? Do you need to go to a school? Where do you need to go to prepare? What skills do you need to learn? How do you need to grow as a person? If this is your plan 10, 15 years from now, how do you need to grow in your character in order to get there? We can partner with God by planning for our future and trust that God is working behind the scenes. As an example, I want to share something that we've been thinking about recently in one church. It's something that we are only exploring at this point. Everybody say exploring. Exploring. It's something that we're exploring. That means it's not a done deal. It's not an announcement. It's not a guarantee. Say it with me. We're exploring. So for the past 18 months, our board, we have a board here that governs our church. We've been thinking about the future, and we've been asking ourselves this question. Are there other communities here in the valley that could use a church like One Church? And we realize we're a unique church. For some of the ways I described earlier, there aren't many around like us. To go to an independent church that is like this, you have to go to San Diego or Denver or Portland at this point, for real. And so we've been asking ourselves that question, and recently we voted unanimously to, say it with me, explore the possibility of starting a second location of One Church in Tempe, which is exciting, but it's also, here's the dreaded word, change. And it can be fearful to hear something like that. And so we're only, say it with me, exploring the possibility of doing that. And here's why. Because if that were to happen, it would be a group of people that aren't together yet in Tempe, that we would gather together and they would fund it. So it wouldn't be funded by us here. The money given here would stay here. But this is a group of people who aren't together yet, but people who may be interested in a church like this up in that area, and I would gather them together, and they would fund this second location of One Church. It wouldn't be two churches. It would be one church in two locations. That's why our name isn't twochurch.com. It would be one church in two locations. One church in two locations. So not a rivalry, but one church in two locations. There would be both services on Sunday mornings with live sermons at both of them. So the times would be staggered a little bit, but you'd have a live sermon at both of those, which means the speaker that day would be at one service and hang out with everybody and then jump in the car and drive to another location. It sounds crazy, but the Methodists have been doing it for 250 years. They call it a 2-point charge. And so, again, it wouldn't be funded by us. It would be something, that's why it's not a guarantee. That's why we're only exploring. It's not by any means a done deal. It may not work, frankly. But my point is, we're thinking about it. Or say it with me, we're exploring. And so I want you to know, as a church, we want to practice this. We want to partner with God to think about the future and the kind of future that God has for One Church. We're only 2 years old as a church. And the life cycle of a church looks a lot like the life cycle of a human, actually. So we are kind of toddling around. That's where we are in our life cycle as a church. We're starting to learn to talk a little bit, spilling food on ourselves. That's where we are as a 2-year-old, as a church. And we have growing and maturing to do, and the same is true for all of us. So we're thinking about that for the future as well. And I'll keep you updated from time to time. It may not be a whole lot to report. Again, we're exploring. And we're going to till the soil and see what's possible. But after 7 years of abundance, the famine comes to the land. Jacob and his remaining sons are in Canaan, which is now modern Israel. They're starving. He sends them down to Egypt, all except for Benjamin. He keeps the youngest at home in Canaan because he doesn't want anything to happen to him. He sends the older brothers to Egypt to get food. The brothers arrive and they bow to Joseph, and they fulfill this prophetic dream that he received when he was a 17-year-old. God has a purpose for a life. He pretends not to recognize them, but he does. They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them, but he speaks harshly to them, and he accuses them of being spies. Scares them a little bit. And but at the same time, though, Joseph turns away from them because he can't hide himself crying, because these are his brothers. And so he gives them grain that they need. He gives them silver in each of these sacks of grain that they're carrying. And he demands that they go home and bring back their younger brother, because that's the story they told him. He says, to prove you're not spies, I want you to bring back this younger brother you have. He wants to see Benjamin, his little brother. And so they do it. They all come back with Benjamin. He shows hospitality to them. They bow to him. When Joseph saw his little brother Benjamin, he has to leave the room because he can't keep it together. He's overwhelmed. He instructs his servants to fill their bags with food and put silver cups in each bag, but to put his own personal cup in Benjamin's bag. He has a plan here. And so Genesis 45, then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants. He cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve you, for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance." So he sends them home to bring back his father Jacob. He comes back to Egypt and lives there for the remaining 17 years of his life, and the family is reunited, and God uses Joseph to save who knows how many people, including his own family, from this famine. God was working behind the scenes. Now Jacob passes away, and the brothers assume, again, Godfather style, he's been keeping us alive while Dad was alive, and now that Dad is gone, he's going to kill us. And they're filled with fear. And they come and they bow to Joseph again, Genesis chapter 50. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God?" That's one to remember. Am I in the place of God? "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Perhaps this is the most difficult thing as we look at our past and we think about the future. Perhaps the lesson we can pull from this is that you really can forgive. And this is going to be our last point. Joseph forgave his brothers. Now, as we end this series, we talked about one thing that can keep you stuck in the past a couple of weeks ago. And does anybody know what it is? We said to embrace your past, you have to grieve losses that you've experienced. Not grieving something in your past can keep you stuck in the past, because that sadness is still there, and grief is the expression of that can finally leave it there, leave the past in the past, and let you move on. The other thing, or at least an other thing, that can keep you stuck in the past is not forgiving. Not grieving or not forgiving can keep us stuck in the past. And just like sexuality, pastors have a way of heaping guilt on people who haven't forgiven somebody that hurt them in the past. Again, making it this punitive thing where you're bad, you haven't forgiven. But that's not how forgiveness works. A lot of times, people don't even want to come to church on a Sunday to know the pastor's talking about forgiveness, because it hits so deep and it's so painful. So for a second, I want to talk about what forgiveness is and what it isn't before we wrap up. And I've talked about this several times in the short history of one church, but I think it can't be said enough. Let's talk about what forgiveness is and what it isn't. So first, what forgiveness isn't. Forgiveness is not trust. It doesn't mean that you can trust the people who hurt you. You can forgive, but it doesn't mean that you trust them. Forgiveness can be instant, but trust has to be earned over time. I've told the story before. It's extreme. I know a lady whose father abused her when she was a child. She has an amazing story of maturity and forgiveness, being able to forgive this guy It's unbelievable. It was just so inspiring. Now she has daughters. Should her dad babysit the daughters? Everybody say it with me. No. Why? Because that's endangering children. Because forgiveness doesn't equal trust. You get the point, right? Forgiveness is also not forgetting. When you go through something really painful, your brain won't let you forget, actually. That's the human brain. Don't touch the hot stove burner again. Stay away from that person, right? You can see something or think of something, and all of a sudden you're flooded with emotions. You know what I'm talking about? That's your brain telling you that hurt. Don't go there again. So your brain may not actually let you forget. Forgiveness may not be forgetting. Finally, forgiveness is not excusing. It's not saying, oh, you hurt me so badly, you did this terrible thing. Oh, it's all right, don't worry about it. No big deal. No, it's not excusing. If something criminal took place, there are going to be legal consequences. Forgiveness doesn't mean you excuse somebody of the consequences of the behavior. Here's what forgiveness is. If you're struggling to forgive, and that's keeping you in the past, here's what forgiveness is. First of all, forgiveness prevents vengeance. It benefits society, because we'd all be dead if we were just seeking vengeance on each other all the time. But it prevents vengeance in your own personal life as well. The New Testament says, God says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. So forgiveness it prevents vengeance. What forgiveness is its release. The New Testament word for forgiveness is a word that means to let go of something. It's actually the same word used for divorce. Interesting? It means to let go, release, or send away. When you forgive something, it's like you're divorcing that offense. And in a sense, you're also releasing the person who offended you. You're not going to hold them, you're not going to hold it over them anymore. Even if you can't, you may not have a relationship with them anymore. You're just going to let it go. Do you see what I'm saying? Forgiveness is release, and it's to let it go, and that's connected to the last one. What forgiveness is? Forgiveness actually frees the one who has been offended. When you release and you let go, you have this experience of figuring out, oh, wait a second. What happened to me was a long time ago. It's not happening anymore, except in my mind. And that person hurt me, but now that's in the past. Ever since then, every time I think about this, I'm hurting me. By not releasing, I'm replaying this, and I'm actually hurting me now. And so when we release, when we send it away, we realize that we're actually releasing ourselves from replaying this offense that happened to us. You really can forgive. As a pastor, I've heard many, many stories over the years of people forgiving amazing things that nobody would ever think they could forgive that, but they can. A mother who was abused by her father, a son ignored by his parents, negligence, a person who lost a job because of lies. They were accused of things they didn't do. A person who thought they would never go back to church because of things that happened at church. A person whose business partner took advantage of them, and on and on and on. People have been able to forgive, and you can forgive. Does it help to understand what forgiveness is and what it isn't? So I'll close with this. This past Thursday, we were invited to participate in a worship learning event in downtown Phoenix. There's this denomination called the United Church of Christ. I'm just kind of blessed to know the new president of that denomination. He invited us to participate in this, and Matt and a couple other members of the One Church band played music there. And they had this event, and then they live streamed it to churches that they wanted to see this creative worship event. And so during the 1 hour, we were released for about 10 minutes to go to these various worship stations around the building. Like you could go offer a prayer for this, and it was a particular theme. And one of them was the forgiveness station. And on the forgiveness station, there was a little plaque explaining what to do, a stack of paper, a pen, and a paper shredder. And the instructions were, write down the name of somebody you need to forgive. And then you pray, God, help me. And it may not be like this instantaneous thing. Maybe it's been a long process. Maybe it'll continue to be a process to actually forgive. But this is meant to be a step, a milestone, a tangible way of saying, I want to release this. I was the first one there. Walked up to the table, wrote down a name. And during this time, there was this guy on this kind of Celtic pipe, and he was playing this really reflective, contemplative music. So, it's kind of echoing through the building. And I was the first one, put it through the shredder. And so, like, all these people turn and look at me, and like, who's the guy who uses a paper shredder in the middle of a worship service that they didn't see the station? You know, I didn't care. I didn't care that they were looking at me because it was such a cool thing for me. I thought, you know what? Even with this beautiful music playing, that high-pitched screeching sound of a paper shredder was a beautiful sound. You know what I mean? Perhaps the sound of forgiveness. Now, what if, in your mind's eye, you could visualize? I might actually invite you to close your eyes right now. There's this person, there's this event, this thing happened, and Throwback's ending today. And we're looking to the past so we can celebrate the present and create a better future. But there's this thing. Maybe there is something I need to grieve. But there's this person I can't quite forgive. And I'm not saying that it's going to be instantaneous and that after the next 2 minutes, this is going to be gone forever. Maybe it's a continual process from this point on, but perhaps this is a milestone today. With our eyes closed, and you think maybe writing that person's name down on a piece of paper. What happened? How does it affect you? How do you feel about it? What do you need to forgive? How has it kept you stuck? How are you sick and tired of it? How much would you love to let it go? In your mind's eye, if you would picture yourself writing that person's name down on this piece of paper. And as you write, some of the anger and the pain flows out of the pen onto the paper. And you feel a little lighter, like you've taken one more step in being able to release this. And then in your mind's eye, picture yourself picking up that paper and holding it above this black office paper shredder. And then just hear that beautiful sound as the paper slips down through the blades and is shredded to 100 pieces. And it could be the sound of release and getting unstuck, being able to celebrate now, to feel lighter and better and more hopeful about the future as you trust that God can bring good things into your life. You feel less anxious. The temptations have a little less power, and you can create a better and more beautiful future. With our eyes still closed, I love this verse from this ancient fountain of wisdom, Don Henley, in the song, The Heart of the Matter. There are people in your life who've come and gone. They let you down and hurt your pride. Better put it all behind you. Life goes on. You keep carrying that anger, it'll eat you inside. I've been trying to get down to the heart of the matter, but my will gets weak, and my thoughts seem to scatter. But I think it's about forgiveness.